One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's Bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Have I got a special treat for you today? Oh my goodness. I'm so excited about today's episode and the conversation that we are bringing to the table that I just know you're going to find so much value in today's interview, in the richness of the conversation and the questions that I had the opportunity to ask. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? So like I said in the beginning, I'm so excited about today's guest. I was so happy whenever her team reached out to me and said that she would love to come on the Profit Podcast and talk to our listeners about diversity and inclusivity and just all the important things that go into creating an environment where people feel comfortable to communicate, but also your audience sees themselves in your story and what you're doing. So today's guest is Erica Courdae. She has dedicated her life to expanding how others interact with the world through powerful conversations. As an entrepreneur and certified coach, her work is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In other words, it's called DEI, imperfect allyship, and imposter syndrome. And we're going to dig into imposter syndrome today. So I hope that you're prepared for that. This work has taken her into communities and onto national stages as a speaker and educator at noteworthy industry events like Alt Summit, She Podcasts Live, and Being Boss. Erica is also the owner of an inclusive beauty salon, Silver Immersion, and the host of Pause on the Play, a podcast that features open dialogue on topics like company culture, visibility, mindset, and more. And we're going to dive into some of Erica's stories about her journey and what podcasting has been like with the work that she's done. So let's dive right into my conversation with Erica. All right, Profit Podcast listeners, I'm so excited about today's guest. So, welcome to the show, Erica.
Thank you so much for having me, Crystal. I'm excited to be here.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be so fun because Erica has an expertise that I have just been dying to talk about on the podcast, but also she has her own podcast. So I love it whenever we have people on the show that can relate to the struggles that our listeners are facing or the challenges that may come up. But before we get into your podcast, I want to know, tell us like what it is that you do and how you got into it.
I am Erica Courdae. I'm a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion coach. I kind of feel like I fell into it. So the funny thing is what I do, I feel like I've been doing for years. So I started years ago in the beauty industry as a cosmetologist, which is shorthand for I like playing in people's hair and getting paid to do so. And over the 20 plus years that I've been doing this, I realized that I was having conversations that were more than just conversations. I was supporting people in figuring out how they presented themselves to the world, identity politics, how to navigate being who you are in a professional environment that maybe isn't super understanding or inclusive of what that means for a Black person in an environment that is majority white or just majority not what they are. And so it was very often that I had these conversations around who you are, how you show up, how you feel, how you navigate, how you process, how you identify. And it really set the stage for me to figure out what coaching was. And when I kind of got introduced to the industry, I was just like, what does this mean? Like a coach? I don't understand what this is. And the more research I did, and I eventually had my own, I felt like I've been doing this and I've been doing it for a very long time. And I want to go and take my course to be certified and not just someone that stuck the name on as a cute tagline. So I took my course and learned more and more and continued to hone my skills and decided that the main lens through which I operate is diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that is the lens that I use for the majority of my time in life, which is pretty much every single day, if I'm being honest about it. I always just feel like diversity, equity, and inclusion are not a way of doing certain things. It is a way in which you do all things. And so supporting clients, whether they be an individual, a solopreneur, a small business, a podcast owner, someone that is a part of a corporation that is simply trying to figure out how they navigate, it's breaking down your implicit bias, digging into whatever things that you need to unlearn to be able to learn better ways of navigating. But how is it that you can become part of the change that you want to see? And how can you do it and be as whole as possible along the way?
Oh, that's so good. So good. I love how you explain things because they're very simple, even though the conversations I imagine you have with your clients are anything but that. But I
Yes.
love how you explain it so well because I'm not sitting here thinking, wait, what does she actually do? And the reason why I bring
Right.
that up is because many coaches will explain to you what they do, and you're like, wait, what? That's a
I
thing?
don't
What?
understand that any more than when you started.
Yeah,
I got nothing.
oh my gosh. So how long, so you say, you've been doing this for a really long time, probably without the paycheck that comes along with actually being a coach, but how long have you been
Yes.
working in the environment of, what you're actually doing today? Has it been a few years? Has it been a while? And what was it that made you say, I think I want to go all in on doing the DEI, the coaching?
It's been a few years for me doing this. The interesting thing was that I looked back in my life and I realized how this was something that was absolutely kind of passed down through epigenetics, in the sense of how um, my mother was someone who my grandmother could pass. So during civil rights, my mother and her siblings could not get into places that my grandmother could. My mother had jobs in which case she was the only Black woman there. And it was very male dominated. So she experienced a lot of racism. I remember understanding at a very young age what it meant to be Black, and that it wasn't something that I had any say in, and having to really navigate how I processed myself in the world that I inhabited, in the context of what I like to wear, what I like to listen to, who I wanted to be friends with, who I wanted to date, and figuring out what those things were all along simultaneously puberty, and trying to figure out 20s. What is this foolishness of just mess? And all throughout, had to not only figure it out for myself, but I was always that person that everybody would want to talk things through. And so I understood very early what it was without truly thinking that it was anything different. It was very normalized for me. And my children are biracial. My husband is white. And so having this full living experience of having to navigate what does the construct of race mean, and how do people process us, and how do we process ourselves throughout our lives, and the things we do, the things we believe that maybe we don't have access to, shifting what we think our worth is versus what someone else believes that it is. There's so many things that I realized, like, this wasn't new at all. And having to really acknowledge that, I don't know why it took me so long, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about it that way until literally just now. I'm like, yeah, I think that's a thing.
Well,
That's a thing.
I love that the journey is natural. Like, it's like, okay, I'm just going to be really honest. I love to talk. It's why I have a podcast. It's why I talk about podcasting. It's something that even since I was a little kid, I always remember like my aunt and uncle, like people that weren't around me all the time, like my immediate family, they'd be like, does this girl ever shut up? And I'm like, will I ever find a way, to use this, you can call it a talent, you can call it just something that I was innately able to do. And then
Right.
I fell into podcasting. And then I feel like you do have, kind of signs along the way. But I think that you have an opportunity whenever like the stars align or whatever you want to say, the universe is like, this is what you need to do right now. And I'm so glad that this is what you're doing because it's so important. And I actually want to start here because I'm fascinated with the diversity, equity, and inclusion and how we can bring that into our podcasts. Because if anything,
Mhm.
I'll I've been listening to podcasts for probably 7 or 8 years. I wasn't
Right.
like I don't listen, or I didn't start out listening as much as I do now to all the diversity of shows that are just out there, the topics, the genres, the hosts, and everything that we have today. And there's so many podcasts. So many of our listeners are probably thinking, well, how do I even get a more diverse audience? How do I get more
Right.
diverse in my communities and my platforms? So, can you kind of speak to that to where someone is like just getting started on this journey and that feels overwhelming to
Right.
approach that they're like, that sounds like so much that I don't even know where to start. So can you kind of speak to that?
One of the things that I think is important is when we think about listenership, or who it is that you're marketing towards, who it is that you're really speaking to, or that you're hoping that you're supporting with what you bring every week or bi-weekly, or how often you show up. That to me is an exercise in tapping into your values to figure out what matters to you, what it is that you support, what it is that you advocate for, what you don't support. Because I don't think you can figure that out without truly understanding, like, what is my purpose?
Right.
What am I doing? Who am I doing it for? What's the goal? And I think once you figure out that, then you can kind of step back and say, okay, well, if I know that I am speaking to women that have children. Am I speaking to all women that have children? Am I speaking to the moms that stay at home? Am I speaking to the moms that have biracial children that are trying to work through what identity looks like for themselves as well as their kids? Like, it's beginning to really distill down and get granular about what it is that matters. And I think once that happens, it's a little bit simpler to then say, well, who could benefit from this? And once you're a little more clear on that, then you can say, okay, well, how can I speak to that? Because you can't get a wider listenership if the people listening don't feel as though they have a reason to listen, if they don't feel as though they hear themselves in the stories that are being told, the visuals that we get when we're listening, that we do in our own heads. Do they feel as though there is something here that I want to take time out of my day and come in, plug in and hear what's happening? If there's nothing that gives them a reason to decide they want to come sit on your virtual couch as they're listening to you talk to them, then they're not going to show up. So if you don't know who they are, then you can't speak to them. And so you can't get any type of diversity, let alone inclusivity, in people knowing that they can come there and feel comfortable and validated that they're supposed to be there versus like, I'm not sure why you're listening here.
Right.
Like, this isn't really for you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. That's really good. And I like, as a follow-up to that, I'm imagining if someone is listening to this, I've been podcasting for a while. Like I've between this podcast and my daily podcast, which is a solo show, I've done more than 400 episodes. And so I'm already in my journey. I've had lots of different types of guests on my show, but then
Mhm.
if I'm imagining someone that's just a few episodes in, they're just getting started
Right.
and they're looking at the guest lineup that they've had on their show. And then they're like, oh, everybody looks exactly like me. Everybody thinks exactly like me. And everybody is in the
Mhm.
same socioeconomic or even geographic location that I'm in, but I want to reach a bigger audience. Is there some kind of work that needs to be done as far as like, how can I approach other podcasters or podcast hosts or guests to come onto my
Mhm.
show in a way? I mean, because I'm thinking about specifically, I haven't had a Latina woman on my show that's a podcaster, but
Right.
I noticed that and I went and I looked and I have a guest lineup. Like she's coming on the show because women that are Latinas and podcasting haven't been represented on my podcast. So I'm like going out and actively seeking that. But is there a certain way that a podcaster can approach that if they notice, I don't have like everybody looks the same, everybody sounds the same. I'm almost bored with my podcast because it's exactly the same every single time. What could they do?
I think part of that is recognizing that there may be a deficiency in your network. It may be a place of you having to recognize that it's time to take in different content. Hey, I really liked your show. Can we have a coffee date? So we can talk. Being able to look out there and see the people that you're listening to, do they have any diversity? So I think it's also like, if I'm taking in this content that is not diverse either, then maybe there's somehow an implicit bias that I'm picking up by not listening to any diversity. And so therefore I'm not seeking it, I'm not attracting it. But if your network doesn't have any diversity in it, it is very challenging to figure out who do you want to have on, because you may not know who are the experts in what they do that don't happen to look, live, or love the way that you do in order to bring them in to create that inclusivity. And so if you recognize that that happens, it is time again to just begin to just kind of reach out, because like this, let's use Instagram, for example. As your content that you take in diversifies, let me get my mouth to cooperate here. The diversity will then show up in what the algorithm will show you. And so just like anything else, if you begin to say, I want this here and I'm going to seek it out, you'll begin to see it show up. So I think it is figuring out, where can I begin to expand what my perception is of who is an expert in these areas that I'm interviewing people for, to broaden that out. and knowing that it's going to continue to branch off. Ask for those referrals. Ask who else you listen to. Ask who else you follow. Hey, do you know anyone else that does this? So it doesn't become a thing of, okay, I want percentages of this and this and this, because then we're just kind of checking boxes. But if we can begin to create relationships, and then that actually creates bonds, and from there, you'll notice a natural evolution begin to happen. It takes time, but it should, in order to truly do it in a way that the foundation is solid.
I love that. I love that, it's not about making a hard pivot and just changing everything. Let's scrap it all and, throw it out the window and light it
Right.
on fire. And, like, I think it's important to recognize first and foremost, if your mind is already heading down this way of, you have this one track mind of thinking of the same people. I grew up in a small town. Okay. I grew up in a really small town. And I think about, everybody that kind of stayed and kept the same principles and values, and they still think the same way in a lot of the same
Yes.
ways. But I'm like, I don't even want to tell you how many times I've moved. It's been all over Texas, but I have moved, and you would be surprised. There's so many different little ecosystems within Texas where it's
Hmm.
you have Dallas Fort Worth, you have Austin, you have Houston, you have West Texas. And so it's funny to me to be kind of exposed to the geographic locations of how people are so different. And I see how my network has expanded in, like you said, consuming all different types of content. And I think it's important
Hmm.
that it's social media. I think it's the entertainment that we watch, the shows that you
That's
see. It
huge.
is.
And it
So
is
can you speak
so
to that?
huge. Absolutely. I feel like if you normalize one type of show, then number one, you're missing out on a plethora of personality types, and you're missing out on a plethora of talent. But you're basically closing yourself in to say that my idea of normal fits into this very small box. It doesn't go beyond this. And so when you take in content, whether that is movies, music, television, miniseries, whatever that is, but it's done in a way that you are seeing different types of individuals and perceptions and realities centered, and all centered as another form of normal, because our normal is simply our own perception. This is our base. And so when you open up, you begin to think like, oh, well, I wouldn't have even thought that. And that right there, those are those tipping points. We need those.
Do you find those with your children? Because I do with mine all the time. Like whenever they say something and I'm just like, oh, yeah. Like I never even thought about, different shows and just different things because,
Mhm.
and Erica, I don't know how old you are, but I think back to, my childhood and all the shows that we had. It was like you had 4 shows to choose from on 3 channels, and that was it.
That was pretty much mine. So I will be 42 this year.
Okay.
So yes. And so, well, and it's just like my kids, their point of reference is I can watch any show and any episode as long as I can find it somewhere on Roku.
Yeah.
One of these things will have it. Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, Disney, somebody will have it. And I'm like, okay. We had about 6 until about 7:30 during the week. Then you got 3:30 till about 5. And on the weekend, you better be up to go ahead and watch it before somebody else took your TV. And you couldn't watch it because at 12 o'clock, they all went away. You couldn't get it again. And we literally, I think as a total, I think we had like one hand's worth of shows.
Yeah.
I mean, channels. Like that was it. And you had to get up and turn the TV channel. Again,
Oh,
points of
yeah.
reference.
Yeah.
But there was so little. And so you made a point to get things at that time, where for them, they don't consider any limitations to access. And that's what the type of show is, what the language is of the show, what's the identification of the characters on the show, what's the theme of the show, when did the show come out. None of those things are limitations to them. And yet somehow we still put ourselves in these self-imposed boxes of this is all I can do and it has to stay here.
Right.
But yet we have more and more access than ever, which is sometimes scary, but it's true.
Right. It's like one of those pros versus cons. Let's see. Like 2 sides to every coin. Like I don't know if this is a great
Mhm.
thing, but yeah, I think back to my childhood and I'm just like, if it was past 10 a.m. on a weekday and you had to stay home from school, all you had was The Price is Right. Like that was all, all you
That
had.
was the highlight, watching Bob Barker, yes.
That was the
Oh,
only thing that you had. And I'm sorry, Drew Carey, you do not make as good of a
oh no.
host as Bob Barker.
No, you will nobody replaces Bob Barker ever. Like, you just
Oh my
don't.
gosh, no. Oh my gosh. Well, now I want to talk to you, Erica, about your podcast because, like I said, like my audience, they love a good behind the scenes. And the first thing that I want to ask you is what is the meaning of your podcast name? Because I love it. I love your
Thank
artwork.
you.
And I want to know the story behind that.
So it started with my co-host and business partner, India Jackson of Flaunt Your Fire, literally having a conversation. It started as an audio blog post, and we had someone that was like, you have a podcast, right? We were like, oh, now you said it. Now we have to do it. You said it out loud. Okay. Because in our head, we were thinking, this is just going to be more work. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this. And so, just like I think most people that start a podcast, like, audio was terrible. Like, the production is not there. And it's like, please don't go listen to those. But we really started it as a way of having conversation and essentially setting it up so the audience was listening in. And it was an open and honest way of just saying, these are the things that are coming up for us. This is what we're encountering. And a very good friend of mine, we were trying to figure out the name, and her daughter was like, well, I mean, I feel like you're really just kind of saying, like, pause on the play. Like, you're saying you have to pause, but like,
What?
wait.
Say it again.
And so she came up with it for us. And the great thing about it is that we actually use it because, like, we'll be in conversation and it's like, pause. Wait, what is that? Explain that. And so it actually really does work in a lot of ways for us. And the fact is, we're asking people to slow down and pause and to think about what's going on and what they really want to do and what's the type of goal that they're really seeking, that they're putting their efforts towards. So it has just been something that absolutely took on a life of its own. And we have just, I mean, it's been a ride. I will say that, but I like to talk. It's just like you. So I'm like, you just gave me a whole platform. Okay.
Did you mean to give me a microphone? Do you know what I'm going to do with this?
Like, well, since you said so,
Since
here
you're
I am.
here. Oh my gosh, this is so good. Well, I'm thinking about, because I was looking at your bio and all the different things that you are an expert in or that you've had experience with. And so I wanted to tie this next topic that I'm going to talk about. It's going to be a multi-layered question here, but
Okay.
I want to talk about imposter syndrome because this is the number one thing that I see come up with people that are looking to start a podcast. They're like, well, I want
Yes.
to, but it's like there's always a but after it. And I'm just like, I have all the things to say about it. But can you talk a little bit about imposter syndrome and if you've experienced any of that in your own podcast journey?
Absolutely. The thing about it that I actually love is that I've done multiple podcast episodes on this, on Pause on the Play, but like my first one that I did on it, when I really laid it out, has still been my favorite. And it's something that I go into a lot, and it comes up often. And so many people feel like imposter syndrome is about feeling like, I can't do this, I'm not enough. Where my view on imposter syndrome is that you are at a point that you are stepping into the next best version of yourself. You are expanding, you are growing, you are evolving. And what's scary is not who you're becoming. What's scary is having to let go of the person that you thought you had to be in order to get to this point. The real you is that next version. That's where you are. But somehow or another, you feel like, but if I let go of who I had to be, what does that mean? What does that change? And I'm afraid of that. And so there's this fear of letting go of who we thought we had to be. And you're afraid of just how much you really are. And so when I hear people talk about this, and we do this in the community, because people are like, I'm doing these DEI efforts and I'm making these changes. And it's like, yes. And I hear you stopping yourself because you're afraid of what happens when you do this and it's successful. What happens if I really do make a huge impact? What does that mean? Can I do it again? Is it going to be too scary? Is it too much? And it's really just something to attempt to stop you. It's something to keep you from going forward. And when you're starting a podcast, you think, who am I to do this? Why should I? And I kind of remind people that instead of saying, why should I? Why not? Why not? There's absolutely no reason to not utilize your voice, being that so many people feel like they can't and they won't. And so utilizing your tool with intention for an outcome that is beneficial for people beyond yourself.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
I mean, how much better can that get?
Oh my gosh. I feel like, hang on, we got like 5 quotables in there that we got to I'm like screenshotting them in my brain. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good because you're absolutely right. It's removing yourself. Like, it's not about you. Everybody, if you're listening to this, if it is about you, you're not going to succeed as a podcaster. I'm just going to be very blunt with you. If you make it all about yourself, it's because it's not going to keep me coming back. Like, I don't want to listen to podcasts where someone's just talking about how incredible they are. I don't care. I really don't. How is your podcast going to help me? Or how is it going to entertain me? How is it going to, motivate me, inspire me? So, oh my gosh, yeah, that's so good. So what I'm hearing you say is remember your why. Or if you don't know what it is, tap into it and try to find out. Like, is that something that, whenever you're working with someone that they have to do kind of that inner work of like, why am I actually doing this? Or how can I make an impact? Like, can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
So one of the first things that we do, using pause on the play as the example, there's a workshop that India and I do. It's the implicit to explicit masterclass. And we do it in groups periodically and we cap it at 6 people. So we don't do large groups, but we also do them privately with whoever like the leader or the owner is and their team members. And this is an opportunity for you to actually identify what matters to you, what it is that motivates you, what you support, what you're against. And as everyone is kind of working through this, you're seeing how this fits together in a team environment and you distill it down. And even if you're doing it on your own, you have to start with you because you inform the business, the brand, the podcast, the message, the mission. And so as you begin to figure out, okay, what is it that is your purpose? What's your focus here? Then you can begin to figure out, what am I talking about? What's going to happen? But if you don't take that time to really get into what is it that fuels your mission that is bigger than self, if you don't have that and you're like, oh, I don't need that, I'm fine, you're going to quickly find yourself having to go back to the drawing board. You don't want to risk being that person that's constantly having tons and tons of iterations because none of them ever stick because there's no roots to them. And nobody's actually listening because they don't know why they should. So they don't.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. So going back to, I'm going to say what you just said. No one's really listening because they don't know why they should. That's so important because this is actually where I found myself. So I had another podcast that I rebranded, and I kind of felt the same way. I felt like it was kind of like a Groundhog Day of the same thing over and over. Even though there were different people, I was hearing different types of stories, but they were all so similar, so the same, and there was no fluidity of the message that was through them. It was female entrepreneurs, which I find very inspiring. I love learning about other women business owners. But at the root of it, and what I did, my own inner work was finding that I loved people that had a message to share, not just they have a business, they have a promotion, they have a book, they have a product, all the things. They have an actual message to share. And at the end of the day, when I look at my most successful podcast students, members of our community, they have that. Their why is very clear, very, very clear. And they can tell you exactly why people come back to their show every single week. And I just, this is such a great conversation. Oh my goodness. Well, I want to ask you, if you had to look back across your podcast journey, can you give me like the biggest high and the biggest low that you've experienced?
Biggest high. That's a good question. I don't know. I feel like one of the highs was probably last June, in the midst of everything that was happening, post the murder of George Floyd, and realizing how I was talking about something, and had been long term. Message was the same. I'd been consistent, and people were like, "Wait, I need to listen. I need to hear." And all of a sudden, recognizing that I have episodes when I feel like, they're planned out, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to give you these takeaways. But I realized that that wasn't actually what drew people in. What drew people in was me. What drew people in was when Indy and I would have these open, honest, unfiltered conversations. And when they were listening and they were like, "I didn't know. I had no idea. I hadn't even stopped to think." And to know that I had an opportunity to just share what I was seeing and experiencing and living, and that presented a benefit to other people that just wanted to be able to listen in and say, "I needed to know this, and I'll continue to listen to find out what else I don't know that I don't know." It just felt like a sweet spot.
Yeah.
It felt like a sweet spot. It's like when you're finally like that thing, when you feel like you can finally drop any of that pretense or preamble of, is this enough? Am I coiffed enough? Am I perfected enough? And it's like, no, that's not the purpose. It's not what it's about. And to know that they were legitimately there for our conversation. Everything else was simply a bonus.
And how long had y'all been podcasting? Because it was last June, last
June.
July. Yeah. So
At
how long
that
had y'all
point,
started?
I had started the April prior of the prior year. So I was, what was that? I'm still having, I'm almost at 100 episodes. And so we were just over a year at that point, I would say. And I was just kind of like, you're about to get the full everything right now. And people were like, "Yes, please, this." And I was like, "This is what you want?" And they're like, "Yes." I'm like, "Okay, here you go." And it's almost like this humbling moment when you're like, "Oh, you're not even really worried about like makeup and hair, and like, you just want me. You legitimately are like,
Yeah.
no, just you."
Yeah.
And there's something really humbling about that. Realizing that you have that type of power to wield, and to wield it wisely.
Well, I love that you, like you said, you were just consistent. You were doing your thing. And then all of a sudden people are like, "Bruh, like, Erica, what are you doing over here? Because we need to know. We need this message right now." And it wasn't just, "Oh, something's going on, I'm going to start a podcast real fast." You're like, "No, I've been here hanging out, drinking my coffee, waiting on waiting on y'all to show up. Pull up a chair. Let's start this conversation."
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh.
And let me think. I don't know. Like you said, like a low, right?
Or like a challenge. Like think back to early days, like, you said you and India were like, okay, we're going to have these conversations. Was there something, and it
Mhm.
could be like logistics, it could be something that could help somebody that's in the stages of just getting started and they're like, what do we need to avoid? What's a challenge?
I think a challenge, and it looks a little bit different now, but it's still kind of there, and it's the show notes piece of it. And it's because for us, it's important to do what we can to make things inclusive as far as the accessibility piece of it. So I started off with just full transcripts, and then after a while, I was just kind of like, this is challenging and I'm not sure if I can maintain it. But then I felt really icky to attach accessibility to a dollar amount. And yes, it is a business and money is involved, but something about that just felt really weird. And over time, I switched to what was a little bit more of like an article. And it's gone through a few different even iterations of that. And it was because we had done research, and our current show producers with all of our podcasting kind of the show notes and all of those things, they had kind of let us know that the research that they had done as well supported that more people really wanted to have more of an article versus just a transcript, because it's still just text and you weren't able to get any of the context or the voice around it. And so it was just a lot of words. And so having an article kind of helped to frame it and make it a little bit more digestible. And so now we're also having those conversations of like, well, there are some people that still want that transcript. And so it's an ongoing thing to figure out, what does it look like to be inclusive, but to understand that inclusive doesn't necessarily mean the same exact thing to everyone, even if their particular disability is the same. And so when it initially was kind of a thing, like I remember having a lot of shame around feeling like I don't have this. And as a Black woman, it didn't feel good that someone else that I felt like belonged to an underserved community, that I couldn't support them in that way. And so that was very challenging for me. And so we've continued to, play with what are some of the best ways that we can do this, and understanding that it's a constant learning curve, but knowing that it's something that we're dedicated to. And, we share that and let people know, like, we're imperfect allies with this as well. And we're figuring out how we can best support you and make sure that you can take in this content, because you're not exempt from finding value in this. And that was just it was a tough moment when it was hard, but it also was something that I'm glad happened, because it's a necessary thing to consider. If you're delivering content in one way and you have people that still want that content but can't take it in that way, what do you do?
Right. I love that you shared how it was an evolution, because I think that so many podcasters, especially people in our community, they listen to shows that have been around for, I mean, almost a decade at this point. And they're just like, well, if it doesn't look like, online marketing made easy, it's not Amy Porterfield's podcast, then why even start? And I'm like, no, 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 hang on. You have to start somewhere, even if it is just a transcript, or even if it is just a few bullet points on a website. Like, I really encourage people to just get started, because, like, as Erica just said, it's an evolution, and your people will tell you, hey, can we actually get a transcript? Hey, can we get a downloadable PDF? Or can we just get another website, like another web page or something that has it? Like, if you listen to your people, they will tell you. But I think it's so important for listeners to hear that you don't have to have it all figured out. You just got to get
No,
started.
exactly. And you have to be patient with yourself in the process. And what you said was key. Listen to your people tell you what they need. People will tell you, but it's whether or not you're open enough to actually listen. And then what you do next with it.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh, Erica, I could talk to you all day about your podcast. I told her, I warned her earlier. I was like, I'm so geeky and I'm going to ask you all the questions about your podcast, because this is just what I do. It's who I am. I can't change it.
Oh,
But
no, don't change it. I'm here for it. It's good.
well, I want to switch gears. And are you up for some rapid fire questions?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first one is, what advice would you give to a brand new podcaster?
Don't worry about perfect. just work on getting your flow of recording. You'll figure out the rest of it with time because you'll throw it all away and do it all again anyway.
Yes, it's so good. So good. Okay, my next question is a two-part question. And it is, what is the dream podcast you would love to be on? And who is your dream podcast guest?
Oh my gosh. I'm like, I don't know if I can. Wow, that's a hard one. I don't know. Oh, no, I do know. I want to be on Michelle Obama's podcast. Please and thank you. That's what I want. That's what I want. I want the superhero that I watched show up at the inauguration last week. Bring me on her podcast and please bring Barack. Please do. Please do.
Can I get a twofer here?
Oh my gosh. Yes, that would be the dream podcast. Dream podcast guest. I don't know. That's an interesting one. I don't know about that. I don't know. And I think it's tough for me because I don't put people on pedestals too much. So I'm always like, I don't know if I have one person that I think is that person. I think I will say that it is someone that wants to laugh and they want to enjoy the conversation and they want to be present. They're not afraid of being vulnerable. They're not afraid of being silly. They're not afraid of dropping a cuss word or two. They're just kind of there and they're willing to just be one of two people having an amazing conversation. And to me, it's not about the ultimate podcast guest. It's hoping that each guest can be an ultimate podcast guest archetype.
I love it. I love it. My last question is, do you consider yourself a perfectionist?
Recovering. Yes. Yes. I am much better than I used to be, but there are definitely times that I'm like, oh, this is making me itchy. I need to fix it. And I try not to because of the simple fact that I talk a lot about imperfection being important, whether that's imperfect action, whether that's imperfect allyship. And so for me, it is very important to remind people by modeling the fact that things do not have to be done perfectly, nor should you strive for that, because perfection is simply procrastination.
Yeah.
Like it is a reason to stop doing something because nothing is perfect. Because if it is, that means it has no place to go. And who wants that?
Yes. Oh my gosh, this is so good. So good. Yes. Oh, thank you so much for all the things that you've shared today. And actually, I know that you wanted to tell our listeners about your community. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So Pause on the Play, the community is our space. It is Indianized community. And we basically will talk imperfect allies through their journey of what do I do next? How do I make impact? And where is it that marketing and visibility and DEI all intersect? And we all do this in our little mighty network corner of the world so that we can support each other, figure out how to buy from each other, support each other, amplify the voices of those that need that support, and continue to just fight the good fight. And you can learn more about the community over at pauseontheplay.com/community.
Yes. And we're going to have all of Erica's links and how you can get connected with her in the show notes. Is there any one particular platform besides your community that you like to hang out with and interact with people?
I've been on LinkedIn a little bit more lately. I used to do more Instagram, but I've been doing a little more LinkedIn because the beauty of LinkedIn is that it really helps those that are trying to amplify their platform to be able to do it in a very targeted way and not be stuck in between TikTok reposting cat memes. So.
I mean, usually people on LinkedIn, like they show up and do business. And like you said, it's not a high school reunion and like all the, oh, I'm thinking of some really funny reels that I've watched in the last few days. And you're right. Like it's totally distracting.
Yes. You're like, wait, this is not what I was here for. What was I here for? Oh man.
Oh, that's so good. Well, we're going to have all of your links in the show notes. Thank you again so much for coming on the show today, Erica.
Thank you for having me, Crystal.
So what did you think? Oh my gosh, the conversation was so good. It was so rich. And I just feel so lucky to have Erica on the show and answer a lot of my questions about diversity and equity and inclusion, but also just hearing how she's so down to earth. And I think that this topic and some of these conversations can be super hard, but talking to Erica about it made me feel very comfortable to ask some of the questions that we asked here today and to continue asking these questions as we continue on our journeys, because I think that this is an important message that we should all address as podcasters who are trying to help other people share their voice. And I hope that some of the questions that we asked here today and then we talked about some of the topics kind of got your mind thinking in another way of how can I be more inclusive and having really awesome guests on your show that represent a variety of people from your audience. But that's all I have for you today. So make sure you go to the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 230 to connect with Erica. Go check her out. Go follow her on social media. And make sure that you go visit the links that we talked about. Again, they're going to be, all of them be listed in the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 230. And we would love it if you would screenshot wherever you're listening to this episode and share it on social media. Tag us and tell us what the number one takeaway that you had today listening to this episode was. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.